A 6-year-old girl was dragged into the yard by her stepmother and her lover right after her father's funeral. A bucket of icy water crashed down on her head to wash away bad luck. Shaking, Sophie Bennett clutched her worn teddy bear in front of her house in Short Hills, New Jersey. Then a sleek Cadillac screeched to a stop. A man stepped out. Jonathan Pierce, self-made millionaire, featured in Forbes and the New York Times. He draped his coat over her shoulders and spoke one sentence. And that line began the battle, where the wicked would pay the price. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. This is a story of courage and justice you won't forget. The wooden door closed behind the group that had just returned from the cemetery. Inside the spacious house in Short Hills, New Jersey, the silence was so heavy that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a hammer pounding against the chest. 6-year-old Sophie Bennett clutched her worn-out teddy bear tightly to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen. That teddy bear was the last gift her mother had given her before dying in a car accident years earlier. And now, her father. David Bennett, a successful businessman and a loving parent, had just passed away after a long illness. In the vast house, Sophie suddenly felt small and suffocated. Karen Bennett, 35, the woman who had entered this house only 2 years earlier as a stepmother, had spent the morning at the cemetery putting on the act of a grieving wife, sobbing, wiping her tears again and again. But the moment the door shut, her face changed completely. Cold, sharp. Her eyes fixed on Sophie as though she were nothing but an irritating thorn. "Can I clean the house for you, Mom?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. Karen turned, let out a bitter laugh, and snapped, each word cutting like a cold knife. "From now on, I'm the lady of this house. I make the decisions here. Don't you dare act pitiful to win my sympathy." Sophie froze in place, hugging the bear tighter, her tiny fingers digging into the frayed fabric. At that moment, the door opened. A man stepped in, dragging a suitcase that he dropped heavily onto the floor. It was Robert Hayes, 38, David's younger brother. To many, Robert had long been nothing but a spoiled man living in the shadow of his successful brother. Yet today he entered with arrogance, as if this house had always belonged to him. Robert collapsed into a chair, twisted open a bottle of whiskey already waiting on the table, and took a long swig. Then he looked Sophie up and down and spat on the floor. "Hello, Sophie. From now on, I'll be here, taking the place of my useless brother." Sophie gasped and stumbled back, stammering, "Uncle, what are you doing in my dad's house?" "This is my dad's house." Karen's voice lashed out, sharp and shrill. "Your father is dead. Do you understand? In this house, I'm the one who decides. And my man now is Robert. From this moment on, you have no right to speak here. Either shut your mouth or get out." Sophie stood stunned, tears brimming in her eyes. Robert burst into mocking laughter, his voice high and scornful. "Look at you, a pathetic little freeloader who can do nothing but cry and cling to that ragged bear. Your father was a fool to spoil you. You think you're a princess? More like a ruined one. In this house, you're nothing but an eyesore everyone wants to throw out." Sophie trembled, clutching her teddy bear. I'll be good. I won't be a bother." Karen suddenly shot to her feet, her eyes flashing with cruelty. She grabbed Sophie's thin arm and snatched up the small suitcase that had already been packed with a few old clothes. The teddy bear was torn from Sophie's arms and flung into the yard. Karen stormed out, carrying a bucket of cold water. "Get out of my house! I'm done pretending to be your kind stepmother. You cursed child! Your father died, your mother died, all because of you. I have to wash away the filth you bring. Just looking at you makes my skin crawl." Sophie panicked, pleading, "Please, Mom. Please don't. I promise I'll be good. I'll stay quiet." Karen's teeth clenched. "Don't call me Mom. You're not my blood. I will never accept a parasite like you. I don't want to see your face in this house for another second." She hurled the entire bucket of icy water onto Sophie. The water drenched her hair and clothes, soaking into her skin until she shivered uncontrollably. The teddy bear lay flattened on the ground, crushed beneath Robert's shoe. He sneered with glee. "See? No different from a mangy stray dog. Perfectly fitting for her." Sophie clasped her hands together, eyes wide with desperate pleading, searching for help. A few neighbors stood at a distance, but as soon as her gaze met theirs, they quickly shut their doors, pretending they had seen nothing. Not a soul dared to intervene. Sophie collapsed onto the cold yard, clutching the sodden teddy bear, her sobs mingling with the icy water streaming down her cheeks. Her hoarse little voice broke out into the night. "Daddy, where am I supposed to go now?" The sound of an engine echoed outside the gate. A sleek black Cadillac screeched to a halt, its tires hissing against the damp pavement. The car door swung open. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a dark suit, his sharp eyes flashing with shock. This was Jonathan Pierce, 40 years old, a self-made millionaire from New York, featured in financial magazines like Forbes and the New York Times. He had built a real estate empire spanning multiple states, a cold strategist in business, yet intensely private about his personal life. Few knew that behind that glamorous image, Jonathan carried the scars of a painful childhood, abandoned, living in fear under the abuse of his stepfather and the indifference of his own mother. And it had been David Bennett, the very friend now laid to rest, who once pulled Jonathan out of that hell and gave him shelter. Now, before Jonathan's eyes was a tragic scene. Little Sophie, shivering, drenched in icy water, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Jonathan clenched his fists as memories from when he was 15 surged back. Nights hiding under tables from his stepfather's blows, every heavy footstep in the hallway. And it was David who had reached out and pulled him from that darkness. He drew a deep breath, pushed open the gate, and stepped into the yard. The early spring wind tugged at his black suit jacket. Jonathan shrugged off his coat and draped it around Sophie's shoulders. The small body beneath trembled under the lingering warmth of the fabric. Sophie lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes glimmering with fragile hope. Her tiny hand clutched the edge of his coat, terrified that if she let go, he too would vanish like everyone else had. Jonathan set a firm hand on her shoulder, then raised his head to face Melissa and Robert. His voice was hoarse, every word weighted with restrained fury. "David has been gone less than a day. And this is how you treat his daughter?" Melissa flinched, but quickly regained her composure. A false tear slid down her cheek, her voice trembling yet icy. "You misunderstood, Jonathan. I only wanted to teach her to listen, to be polite. The girl was disrespectful to her uncle. I was just trying to scare her a little." Robert leaned back in his chair, took a drag from his cigarette, and blew the smoke directly at Jonathan. "I'm her uncle. This is family business. You already showed up late to the funeral, and now you want to play the hero? This has nothing to do with you. Best stay out of it." A cold flash glinted in Jonathan's eyes. In his heart, the image of David, the friend who had once saved him, burned vividly. And now David's daughter was being humiliated before him. Sophie clutched Jonathan's sleeve, her voice thin and desperate. "Uncle, they'll throw me out again. I have nowhere to go." Please." Jonathan looked down, meeting her terrified eyes. It was the same fear he had carried throughout his own childhood. He inhaled deeply, then turned to Melissa and Robert. "She's coming with me," he said, his voice ringing out firm, leaving no room for argument. Melissa's mouth opened in protest, but Robert squeezed her arm, whispering mockingly, "Let him take her. The brat will crawl back soon enough. He won't last long." Melissa ground her teeth, forcing a crooked smile. "Fine. If you want to play the hero, go ahead. But remember, she's cursed." Jonathan didn't reply. He bent down, lifted Sophie into his arms, and walked straight out the gate. The girl clung to him, her soggy teddy bear pressed tight against her chest. The Cadillac's door opened and shut with a soft thud. The car pulled away, leaving behind Robert's derisive laughter and Melissa's venomous glare. Inside the car, Sophie curled against the seat, her small hands trembling as she hugged her ragged teddy bear. Her wide eyes brimmed with fear as she whispered, her voice fragile as the wind. "Uncle, are you going to leave me too? Like they did?" Jonathan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Street lights flashed across the windshield, reflecting in his eyes. Memories flooded back, nights spent shivering by a window, waiting for a hand to lift him up, a hand that never came. He pressed his lips together, saying nothing. Only the steady hum of the engine filled the silence. Sophie could even feel the faint tremor in his hands. The Cadillac descended into the underground garage of a luxury Manhattan high-rise. Jonathan pulled into his reserved spot, cut the engine, and leaned over to open the door for Sophie. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. An unspoken message. "Follow me." They crossed the lobby. The doorman, Mr. Harris, a man in his 50s, gave a polite nod. His eyes lingered on Sophie's soaked clothes as though he wanted to ask, but when he met Jonathan's stern gaze, he fell silent. The elevator doors slid open. Jonathan and Sophie stood side by side. She hugged the teddy bear tightly, her eyes fixed on her wet shoes. The elevator opened onto a carpeted hallway. Jonathan swiped his card. The light blinked green, and the penthouse door unlocked. Inside, the apartment was spacious and filled with light. The living room flowed into the kitchen, everything neat and orderly. The silence so complete that even breathing seemed loud. Jonathan handed Sophie a soft towel. "Sit down. Dry off." He brought her a small sweater and sweatpants, then pointed to the bathroom. When Sophie emerged, her hair had been lightly dried, the oversized sweater hanging loosely on her small frame, making her look even more fragile. In the kitchen, Jonathan reheated a pot of chicken soup, ladled it into a bowl, and set it before her. The warmth spread gently through the air. Sophie stared at the soup and whispered, "I'll just eat a little, so I don't get scolded." Jonathan paused, then sat across from her, his voice calm and steady. "Here, you don't need permission to exist. When you're hungry, you eat. When you're tired, you sleep. No one will scold you for that." Sophie hesitated, then picked up the spoon. She ate slowly, each bite small, her eyes darting up at him between spoonfuls as if waiting for anger. But Jonathan simply sat quietly, his hands folded, watching her breathing steady. When the bowl was half empty, Sophie set the spoon down and asked softly, You don't hate me?" Jonathan answered after a pause, "No one has the right to hate a child for simply existing." Sophie lowered her head, her voice breaking. "They said I was bad luck." Jonathan draped a thin blanket over her legs and spoke firmly. "You are David Bennett's daughter, and you are yourself. No one can define you by their cruelty." Jonathan cleared the dishes, the clink of porcelain echoing softly. Sophie whispered, "I won't make the house dirty." Jonathan turned back with a faint smile. "A house is meant to be lived in. It's not a showroom. Here, you're allowed to make a little mess." He led Sophie into the guest bedroom. The bed was already made, a moon-shaped lamp glowing softly on the side table. He set down a glass of water. "Do you want to call anyone?" Sophie shook her head, clutching her teddy bear as she slid under the blanket. Her breathing mixed with soft sobs. "Dad. Mom. Why did you leave me with them?" Jonathan sat outside the door, his back against the wall, hands clasped. He didn't knock, didn't intrude, only listened as her sobs grew quieter, breaking off into uneven breaths until at last they faded. Later, he opened his laptop in the living room and typed a brief email to Attorney William Anderson. "I need temporary guardianship of Sophie Bennett. Signs of abuse present." He began a list. Confirm legal status, contact the school, arrange a child psychologist, and prepare to confront Melissa. The night deepened into silence. In her sleep, Sophie shifted. The teddy bear slipped from her arms and knocked against the bed frame. From within, the old stuffing came a faint metallic click, like metal brushing metal. Then it vanished. Jonathan didn't hear it. The penthouse sank back into silence, holding on to a secret not yet revealed. Dawn spread a pale light over the Manhattan sky. Inside the quiet penthouse, Sophie tiptoed out of the small bedroom, clutching her worn teddy bear. Her hair was tousled, the oversized sweater slipping off one shoulder. Jonathan had been up early. He was in the kitchen brewing coffee, a stack of unfinished documents in his hand. Hearing the soft footsteps, he turned. "Good morning, Sophie. Did you sleep well?" Sophie gave a slight nod, though her eyes avoided his. She placed the bear on a chair, then noticed a seam torn open at its ear. Tugging gently, her fingers brushed against something hard inside. Eyes widening, she pulled out a tiny silver USB stick, no bigger than her thumb. "Uncle Jonathan, my bear ripped open. There was this inside." Sophie's voice trembled as she held it out. Jonathan froze. He strode over immediately, carefully taking the USB from her hand. His sharp eyes flickered with a sudden intuition. "Do you want to see together what's inside?" Sophie nodded, hugging the bear tightly against her chest. Jonathan opened his laptop, inserted the USB. The screen displayed a single file, titled with a date from 1 year ago. He clicked. David Bennett's voice came through the speakers, hoarse, weak. "Brian, what is this medicine bottle? I don't need it. When I take it, my heart races. Melissa, where did you get this?" Robert Walsh's cold voice followed. "The doctor prescribed it. Drink it. You're weak. Stop being paranoid." Then came a brief silence before Melissa's whisper slid in, chillingly clear. "Give him more. Let him die already." Sophie broke into sobs, clutching her bear, tears streaking down her face. "Uncle, they poisoned Dad. They killed him." Jonathan gripped the edge of the table, fury flashing in his eyes. He bent down, placed a steady hand over Sophie's small one, and spoke slowly, firmly. "Your father didn't want you to live in fear. He left you the truth, and we will bring it into the light." Jonathan rewound the recording, listening intently to every breath, the clink of glass, the scrape of a chair. He extracted the file, saved 2 copies, one on the hard drive, another to a secure cloud. "Uncle Jonathan, if they find out, they'll take the USB back, won't they?" Sophie looked up, wide-eyed with worry. Jonathan leaned close, his gaze unwavering. "No one can take it anymore. I'll guard it. Not even them." He picked up his phone, dialing a middle-aged man. "William, it's me. I need you today. There's evidence tied to poisoning and a family dispute." On the other end was Professor William Anderson, lawyer and academic, an expert in finance and family law. His voice was calm, steady. "Don't send anything over messages. Keep it intact. I'll come. Jonathan, stay calm. Protect the child first." Jonathan ended the call, then sat beside Sophie. "Today we'll have a proper breakfast. After that, a lawyer I trust will come meet you. He doesn't talk much, but he always stands on the side of truth." Sophie wiped her tears, nodding faintly. "If Dad were alive, would he be happy I found this?" Jonathan swallowed hard, replying softly, "Your father would be proud. Proud that you were brave enough to face the truth." He slipped the USB into a shock-proof pouch, locked it in the small safe in his study. Meanwhile, in a rented apartment in Newark, Melissa Grant slammed a newspaper down on the glass table. Morning headlines screamed, "Millionaire Jonathan Pierce carries David Bennett's daughter out of the house." "He's challenging me," Melissa hissed. Robert lounged in a chair, puffing smoke, smirking. "Stop the crocodile tears. The press already sees through it. Don't think I don't know. The girl's with him. She still holds company shares. If she slips beyond reach, our plan collapses." Melissa clenched her fists. "I'll sue him for kidnapping. I'll say he's exploiting her to seize the assets." Robert narrowed his eyes, his tone dry as steel. "Then sue. But remember, drag her back at all costs. She holds the key. If she's lost, we both lose everything." By noon, Jonathan's phone buzzed nonstop. Headlines flooded the screen. Melissa sobbing in front of cameras, clutching David's portrait, her voice trembling. "Millionaire Jonathan Pierce kidnapped my daughter to steal the inheritance." Jonathan switched off the phone, poured Sophie a glass of warm milk. "Drink. Then we're going to the library." Sophie hugged her teddy bear tightly, fear flickering in her eyes, but nodded. The library was hushed, filled with warm light. At the front desk stood a young woman with neatly tied hair and a name tag that read, "Emily Carter." She smiled. "How can I help you two today?" Jonathan laid a folder on the counter, a copy of the will, stock transfer agreements, medical treatment records. "I need dates verified, authenticity checked, and any irregularities flagged." Emily nodded, then leaned gently toward Sophie. "Hello there. I'll help you find the right answers." She quickly tapped into hospital records, corporate registries, public databases. Her fingers danced across the keys until her eyes froze on a detail. The stock transfer contract is dated March 14th, but the hospital records show Mr. David Bennett was under sedation for 48 hours on that day. This signature could not have been his. Jonathan stiffened. Emily printed the documents, circling the discrepancies in red. "I'll prepare a comparison. Contract dates, hospital logs, and past signature samples. The inconsistency is serious." Sophie whispered, trembling. "You believe me, don't you?" "I'm not lying." Emily smiled warmly. "I believe you, and I'll help." Jonathan rested a hand on Sophie's shoulder, nodding. "Thank you." Just then, a message from Anderson flashed on his phone. "Keep Sophie close. I've filed for a temporary child protection order. Prepare duplicates of all evidence." Emily guided Sophie to the scanner, showing her how to press the button. For the first time that day, Sophie gave a faint smile. By the time they left the library, the sky was dimming. A cool breeze drifted through the street. Jonathan sensed unease. Across the road, a black car idled, its headlights flicking on, then off. Jonathan tightened his grip on the folder and on Sophie's hand, hurrying toward the apartment building. Inside the car, Robert smoked, a cold smile curling at his lips. He stared at the lit window above, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel. Upstairs, Jonathan pulled the curtains closed, called building security to increase patrols, and sent Anderson a terse message. They followed us to the door. The black car's engine roared to life, pulling away into the night, leaving behind only the shadow of a threat. The next morning, gentle sunlight filtered through the thick curtains of the penthouse. Jonathan had just finished brewing a cup of black coffee when his phone buzzed relentlessly. A message lit up on the screen from Dorothy Wilson, the longtime neighbor of the Bennett family. My kitchen window was smashed. A brick was thrown inside. The paper wrapped around it read, "Keep quiet." Jonathan immediately told Sophie to stay downstairs with Mr. Harris in the lobby, while he drove straight to the old apartment block in Short Hills. Dorothy opened the door, her face pale, hands still scratched from shards of glass. The kitchen was in disarray, the window shattered, a brick lying in the middle of the floor. Jonathan picked it up with gloves. The paper wrapped around bore 3 large scrawled words, "Keep quiet." Dorothy's voice shook. "I know who did it, but I won't take back what I said." Jonathan nodded, reassuring her. "I'll make sure you're safe. We will bring the truth into the light." Before he could put the brick away, his phone rang again. A hurried voice reported, Frank Miller, the homeless man living near the block, had just been attacked in a back alley. Jonathan rushed Dorothy to the scene. Frank sat slumped against a wall, his face bruised and swollen, blood trickling from his lip. He managed a crooked grin. "I still got my teeth. Don't worry. 3 guys, faces covered. They told me to shut up. But I can't. That girl doesn't deserve to live like me." Dorothy handed him a bottle of water, nodding firmly. "We go together. No one gets left behind." Jonathan gripped Frank's shoulder, his voice low and steady. "You won't stand alone. This is Anderson's number. Call him. He'll protect both of you." There they stood, an accomplished businessman, an aging neighbor, a battered homeless man, side by side in the morning light, silently sealing a vow to tell the truth. That afternoon, Jonathan returned to the library to pick Sophie up. Emily Carter had prepared a comparison chart. David's hospital admission dates, the day of the stock transfer, and past signature samples. Red marks leapt off the page, proof of blatant forgery. "I contacted the hospital records office," Emily said quickly. "The contract was signed while Mr. Bennett was sedated. This signature is undeniably fake." Jonathan nodded. "Tomorrow we'll meet Anderson. I'll bring the witnesses in this file." Dusk was falling by the time they returned to the penthouse. Sophie went to bed early, while Jonathan sat at his desk. He reopened old maintenance files for the car David's wife had driven before her fatal crash. Among them was a technical report, BCM/ECU log, abnormal override entries. Jonathan studied the circuit map, noting abnormal log entries recorded exactly 1 week before the accident. He called a trusted automotive engineer. The man's voice came firm through the line. "This has nothing to do with the brakes. Someone tampered directly with the ECU, the central control unit. That takes serious skill and direct access to the vehicle." Jonathan clenched his jaw. Robert often borrowed David's car, always with some excuse about maintenance or picking up a girlfriend. Now it's clear. He printed the entire file, sealed it in a waterproof pouch, and scrawled across the cover, "ECU, not brakes. Likely Robert." Jonathan shut off the study lights and drew the curtains. Outside, city lamps glowed dimly. Beneath the awning across the street, a shadowy figure stood still for a long time. A cigarette tip flared, then went dark. Jonathan pulled the curtains closed and locked the balcony door. He glanced toward Sophie's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her teddy bear, a lock of hair across her cheek. Jonathan whispered to himself, "Robert, you didn't just take David. You stole this child's mother, too. You stole the laughter of a family." His phone buzzed. A message from Anderson. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring witnesses and technical evidence. Don't leave Sophie alone." Jonathan sat outside Sophie's door, eyes closed, as the night pressed on with unseen threats lingering in the dark. The next morning, as Jonathan drew the curtains, another message from Dorothy flashed. Kitchen window smashed again. Another brick left. Before he could react, news came that Frank had been beaten badly. Jonathan sped off, finding Frank bloodied but defiant. "3 men jumped me. Told me to shut my mouth. I won't. I'll testify." Dorothy clutched his hand, trembling yet resolute. "We'll go together. None of us will back down." Jonathan quickly photographed the scene, then called Anderson. The lawyer's voice was crisp and unwavering. "Document everything. Get Frank examined. I'll notify the court of witness intimidation by noon." Later that day, when Jonathan picked Sophie up at the library, he quietly explained what had happened. Her small face went pale. She whispered, "It's all because of me. If I weren't here, they wouldn't be hurt." Jonathan dropped to his knees, gripping her shoulders. "No, the blame is theirs, the wicked ones. You don't carry anyone's sins. Don't ever think that way." Her wide eyes filled with tears. "But they hate me. They hate the truth." Jonathan shook his head, his voice firm. "They don't hate you. They fear the truth, and the truth cannot be silenced." That afternoon, Jonathan led Sophie, Dorothy, and Frank to William Anderson's law office in Midtown Manhattan. A polished brass plate gleamed at the door. William Anderson and Associates, Family and Finance Law. They were greeted by Paula Green, the warm-smiled paralegal, who offered Sophie a cup of cocoa. "Sit here, sweetheart. The grown-ups will talk complicated things, but Mr. Anderson will explain it, so you understand." Anderson entered, a man in his 50s, silver hair, eyes sharp yet calm. He shook Jonathan's hand, then bent down slightly to Sophie. "Hello, dear. Today, I'll be listening to everything." In the conference room, Jonathan placed the USB and files on the table. Anderson plugged in the device, listening carefully to David's weak voice questioning the medicine, Robert's cold reply, and Melissa's whispered words. "Give him more. Let him die." Anderson arranged the evidence in neat order. Dorothy's statement, photos of broken glass, Frank's injury report, Emily's signature analysis, the car's technical logs. He nodded, speaking slowly, as though counting each beat. "We now have audio evidence, eyewitness testimony, forged contract indicators, and technical proof of tampering. I will petition for witness protection and request the court grant you temporary guardianship." Jonathan nodded firmly. "I'm ready." Just then, the door creaked open. Sophie stood holding her cocoa, eyes wide. She had overheard. Her voice quivered. "Mr. Anderson, my mom. Her death. It wasn't an accident, was it?" Jonathan sprang to his feet, kneeling before her, his voice trembling but steady. "Some truths will come piece by piece. But today, let me carry this weight for you. One day, you'll know everything." Sophie bit her lip, tears falling, but her gaze glimmered with resolve. I'm not alone anymore, am I?" Anderson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are never alone. The law will stand by you." Paula handed Anderson another file, the petition for a temporary protection order, and an emergency hearing date. Anderson signed swiftly, then turned to Jonathan. Tonight, minimize movement. Don't let her go anywhere alone. I've already alerted the police. As they left the office, Sophie squeezed Jonathan's hand, whispering, If I have to speak in court tomorrow, I'll tell the truth. Jonathan tightened his grip, his eyes blazing with determination. And I'll be right beside you. Night fell. In the penthouse, Jonathan organized the files, backing up the USB, the photos, the technical report. The evening news flickered on. Melissa stood in front of cameras, dressed in black, eyes glistening as she declared, I will fight to regain my daughter. Jonathan Pierce is nothing but a greedy man trying to seize control of the shares. Sophie hugged her teddy bear tight, fear flashing in her eyes. Jonathan stepped forward, blocking half the screen, his voice low and resolute. Listen to me, Sophie. Noise is not the truth. Outside, the hammer of public opinion echoed loudly. But within the penthouse walls, Jonathan and Sophie braced themselves for the battle that was about to begin. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through Manhattan's glass towers, Jonathan held Sophie's hand as they walked through the gates of the New York County Family Court. The hallway was crowded, reporters jostling with cameras flashing relentlessly. William Anderson walked beside them, carrying a thick stack of files. His assistant, Paula Green, was already waiting with additional documents in hand. A bailiff, Miller, led them into courtroom 3. On the high bench sat Judge Patricia Coleman, her expression stern and unyielding. At the defense table, Melissa Grant wore a black dress, clutching a tissue, her eyes red and puffy. Beside her sat Brian Walsh, in a dark shirt, his face carefully arranged to play the part of a kind uncle. Their attorney, Avery Clark, adjusted his tie before stepping forward. The gavel struck sharply. Court is now in session. Attorney Clark began, his voice ringing with confidence. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Melissa Grant, is a desperate mother. Her child has been taken from her home against the will of her lawful guardian by Mr. Jonathan Pierce, a powerful businessman. This is abduction in disguise. Melissa sobbed on cue, dabbing her eyes with the tissue. I just want my daughter back. Jonathan stood tall, his voice steady and firm. Your Honor, this child has been abused. I have witnesses. I have evidence. The judge tapped her gavel. Call the first witness. Dorothy Wilson stepped up to the stand, her hands trembling. I live downstairs. That day I saw them drag the girl out into the yard. Brian grabbed her wrist, while Melissa carried a bucket of water and poured it straight over her head. The child was shivering, begging them to stop. Attorney Clark cut in sharply. Do you hold any personal grudge against my client? Dorothy shook her head, her voice resolute. No. I was simply afraid. They have money and influence, but I saw it with my own eyes. Next came Frank Miller, wearing a worn knit cap, his rough voice unwavering. I sleep out back. I heard the child crying. When I looked, I saw her being dragged, stumbling on the steps. I wanted to step in, but Brian stared at me like he'd kill me if I moved. I can't stand by. No child should live the way I did. I have to tell the truth. The judge nodded, jotting notes. Anderson stepped forward, placing a small USB drive on the table. Your Honor, this is an audio recording left behind by Mr. David Bennett himself, hidden inside his daughter's teddy bear. The file's timestamps and metadata have been verified. No tampering whatsoever. With the court's permission, I will play it now. The courtroom fell silent. David's weak, weary voice spilled from the speakers. Brian, What is this bottle of medicine? I don't need it. When I take it, my heart races. Melissa, where did you get this? Brian's voice came cold and flat. The doctor prescribed it. Drink it. Then Melissa's chilling whisper, give him more. Let him die already. A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Melissa's face went pale. Brian shot up, shouting, fake, fabricated, spliced together. It means nothing. Anderson calmly held up a document. This recording has been certified by the Digital Forensics Department. There are no signs of splicing. He continued, and here is the technical report from the car manufacturer. The brakes were never at fault. The ECU, the Central Control Unit, was deliberately tampered with. The only person with consistent access to the vehicle was Brian Walsh. Judge Coleman flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing like steel. Melissa gasped, interjecting desperately. I only wanted to teach her. I never meant to hurt her. Jonathan leaned down, whispering to Sophie, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. But Sophie drew in a deep breath and rose to her feet. Her voice was small, but it carried across the courtroom. If they loved me, they wouldn't pour water on me. They wouldn't laugh when I cried. The entire room went silent. Sophie's tiny hands gripped the hem of her dress, but her eyes no longer hid. The judge paused for a long moment, then instructed the clerk, record the child's words verbatim. Anderson presented one more piece of evidence, Emily Carter's handwriting comparison chart. This proves that the stock transfer agreement was signed while Mr. David Bennett was in a medically induced coma. The signature does not match his prior samples. This is outright forgery. Judge Coleman nodded firmly. The court acknowledges the evidence of forgery. Brian lost control, leaping to his feet and shouting, that brat is lying. He just wants the money. Melissa tugged at his sleeve, her hands trembling violently. The gavel slammed hard. Judge Coleman's voice thundered, order! Based on the preliminary evidence of abuse and forgery, this court orders temporary guardianship of the child. Sophie Bennett is granted to Mr. Jonathan Pierce. The immediate arrest of Melissa Grant and Brian Walsh for investigation into poisoning, child abuse, and property fraud. Further hearings will proceed once the district attorney supplements the criminal file. Court officers stepped forward swiftly, handcuffing Melissa and Brian. Melissa collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Brian stood frozen like stone. Cameras flashed furiously, flooding the room with blinding light. Sophie burst into tears and flung herself into Jonathan's arms. Do I have anyone left? Jonathan held her close, his voice breaking yet steady. You still have me. And you still have yourself. In that embrace, amid the storm of media chaos, a small pocket of silence opened, warm, unshakable. After signing the temporary guardianship papers, Jonathan guided Sophie out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Paula Green handed him an envelope containing the documents and reminded him of the appointments with Child Welfare Services. Jonathan bent down, whispering to Sophie, let's go home. This house will no longer have shadows. That afternoon, a locksmith arrived to change every lock. The wooden door, once slammed in Sophie's face, now opened with a soft click. Sophie stood at the threshold, her small feet hesitant. Jonathan placed a hand on her back. From now on, this will be a new beginning. No more darkness. Sophie inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The room was bare, its walls faded and chipped, empty frames still hanging quietly. They seemed to wait for new memories to fill them. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the glass windows of the Manhattan penthouse, the home already felt different. The cold silence was gone, replaced by the breath of a small family. Jonathan set his coffee cup down and glanced toward the living room. Sophie was carefully drying her worn teddy bear with a handkerchief, as if it were a sacred ritual. She turned slightly, her small voice trembling. "Uncle Jonathan, will this house really be mine? I won't be thrown out again, will I?" Jonathan's smile softened, his gaze gentle. "This is your home. From now on, no one will ever drive you away again." That noon, the first knock came at the door. It was Emily Carter, carrying a box of children's books and a few colorful rugs. She set them on the table, smiling warmly at Sophie. "I thought your reading corner could use some books and rugs. These are waiting for their new owner." Sophie brushed her hand over the book covers, her eyes shining. Soon after, Dorothy Wilson arrived with a large fabric bag filled with floral curtains she had stayed up all night sewing. "I'm not very skilled, but I wanted the rooms to have some warmth." Then came Frank Miller, lugging a toolbox wrapped in a donated coat someone had given him. He scratched his head awkwardly. "I know how to use a hammer and nails. Let me build some shelves for the kids' books." The apartment filled with sounds, the pounding of hammers, the snip of scissors, laughter mingled with the hum of conversation. Finally, Linda Johnson, the 60-year-old cafe owner from the corner, stepped in. She set down a tray of sandwiches and a steaming pot of soup, her voice warm like an oven. "I don't have fancy words, but nobody heals on an empty stomach. Eat first, then you'll have strength to keep going." Jonathan opened cans of paint and joined Frank in repainting the walls. Dorothy measured and cut fabric for curtains. Emily labeled each book. Linda busied herself with mugs of hot cocoa. Sophie wandered happily, glancing at the shelves, helping set the table, her eyes slowly lighting up. On the whiteboard, Jonathan wrote in bold letters, "Harbor Light Center," and circled it. By evening, Sophie's room had changed completely. Fresh paint on the walls, clean sheets on the bed, and a small desk placed by the window. She stood at the doorway, hesitating. I'm still afraid of this room. It's where Dad died. I'm scared to step inside." Jonathan leaned against the doorframe, his voice low but gentle. "You have the right to be afraid, and you have the right to take your time. Walk in only when you're ready." Sophie stayed quiet for a moment, then placed her teddy bear gently on the pillow, whispering, "I want Dad's picture hung here again." Jonathan nodded. "Tomorrow, we'll frame that picture together." The following day, a social worker arrived, Ms. Rivera, short-haired, firm in demeanor, but with kind eyes. She walked through the apartment, noting the bookshelves, the curtains, the freshly painted bedroom. She asked Sophie a few soft questions. "How do you feel here? Are you eating and sleeping well? Do you feel afraid?" Sophie lowered her head, but whispered back, "Here. No one yells at me. I have a place to read. I want to stay." Ms. Rivera nodded, jotting quickly. "The best thing for a child is a consistent adult by their side. Keep it this way." A week later, Jonathan walked Sophie to school. He stood by the gate until he was sure she was safely inside before turning back. That afternoon, the house bustled again. Emily set up a story corner for neighborhood children. Frank finished 2 long pine bookshelves, the smell of fresh wood still lingering. Linda brought more cookies, scolding half seriously, "Don't eat too many, or you'll get a stomachache," before sneaking an extra bag into Sophie's backpack. Dorothy sat knitting by the window, glancing up now and then with a smile. Anderson arrived with a stack of documents. The apartment had been preliminarily certified as a small community center. A house once filled with shadows was slowly becoming a refuge of hope. One evening, Jonathan was folding blankets in the living room when Sophie appeared, wringing the hem of her sweater. She stood silently for a long time before blurting out, "Uncle Jonathan, do you want to be my dad for real? Or is it just because you miss my dad?" The room fell still. Jonathan set the blanket aside, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "At first, it was because of your father. He once saved me, so I thought I was paying a debt. But now, it's because of you. You are my heart's choice." Sophie's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice quivering. "If one day you forget about my dad, will you still choose me?" Jonathan smiled, pulling her into his arms. "There are many things I might forget, but I will never forget the promise I'm making to you today." Sophie burst into tears, but in those tears was the first taste of relief. By the weekend, a wooden sign reading Harbor Light Center was hung at the porch. Curious neighborhood children flocked in. At first, Sophie hesitated, but soon she was confidently showing them the reading corner, teaching them to fold paper planes, sharing her box of crayons. As Christmas drew near, Linda set the table for a feast. Emily hung paper lanterns, Dorothy filled jars with peppermint candies, Frank decorated a wooden Christmas tree and strung it with lights. Jonathan placed a small gift-wrapped box at the center of the table, wrapped in purple paper with a white ribbon. When the house quieted, he called Sophie over. "Go ahead, open it." Sophie tugged at the ribbon. Inside was a soft purple scarf. Beneath it lay an old envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. David Bennett. With trembling hands, Sophie unfolded the letter. The first line read, "If you are reading this, it means the truth has come to light. Trust Jonathan, for I trust him more than anyone." Tears streamed down Sophie's cheeks. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering, "Daddy, I found it. I'll keep it forever." Jonathan stood silently, eyes wet. He knew he had kept his promise to his fallen friend. A year had passed since the court's temporary ruling. Another winter settled over Manhattan. Hanging proudly on the porch was a polished wooden sign, Harbor Light Center. Inside, golden lights glowed warmly, so different from the cold, empty apartment Sophie had once entered in fear. Now 7 years old, Sophie wrapped her long purple scarf around her neck. She stood on a wooden stool, carefully tying the final red ribbon onto the sign. Beneath her, Jonathan steadied the stool, looking up with a rare, softened smile. "All good?" he asked. Sophie nodded, stepping down. Her scarf fluttered as her eyes sparkled with joy. "All good. The sign is strong." Jonathan patted her head. In his chest rose a feeling that had been missing for so many years. Family. Inside, preparations for Christmas were underway. Emily Carter stacked books on the shelves, labeling them Christmas gifts. Dorothy Wilson adjusted the floral curtains she had sewn, her hands trembling, but her eyes full of pride. Frank Miller connected bulbs from recycled wires. With a few clicks, the entire room lit up. Linda Johnson carried in trays of hot cocoa and cookies, the sweet aroma of chocolate filling the home. Homeless children from the neighborhood gathered inside, each holding a mug of cocoa, sitting around the wooden tree Frank had built. Their laughter rang out, erasing the shadows of Sophie's painful past. Just then, the door opened. William Anderson stepped in, snow clinging to his coat, carrying a thick envelope. He walked straight to Jonathan, his voice steady and grave. "There's official news." Jonathan took the envelope and opened it. Inside was the court's final ruling. Melissa Grant and Brian Walsh had been sentenced heavily for poisoning, child abuse, and financial fraud. The technical report confirmed tampering with the ECU of David's wife's car. Jonathan exhaled deeply, folding the papers. Thank you, Bill. Emily smiled gently. Justice may come late, but it doesn't disappear. Sophie ran up, tugging Jonathan's hand. Uncle. No, Dad. Can I finally call you Dad now? Jonathan bent down, his eyes blurred with tears. He nodded firmly. You are my daughter. From today and forever. Sophie threw her arms around him, her voice echoing through the warm room. Dad. Church bells rang in the distance. Children swarmed the Christmas tree, tearing open gifts with shouts of delight. Linda handed Sophie a candy cane. Dorothy wrapped a hand-knit scarf around her shoulders. Emily gave her a handwritten book. Jonathan stood near the doorway, watching it all. His mind flashed back to a year earlier. Sophie, trembling, drenched under a bucket of ice water, her eyes pleading for help. He whispered softly, as if to his late friend, David, I kept my promise. She's no longer alone. Anderson approached, his voice low. The adoption papers will be finalized after the holidays, but in every way that matters, you are already father and daughter. Sophie squeezed Jonathan's hand tightly, her eyes shining with certainty. From now on, I won't be afraid anymore. Jonathan held her close, answering firmly, and you will never have to be afraid again. The room filled with song. The children's voices rose, clumsy but warm, filling every corner. Sophie stood beside Jonathan, lifting her face as her small voice blended in. There were no more tears, only light. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the new wooden sign, Harbor Light Center, a place where every child has the right to hope. In Jonathan's arms, Sophie looked up at the sky and whispered, Mom, Dad, I'm not alone anymore. I have a family now. Jonathan lowered his head, resting his forehead against her hair, whispering like a vow. You will never be alone again. Snow fell thick on Christmas Eve. Inside Harbor Light Center, golden light warmed every face. The children sat in a circle around the wooden Christmas tree Frank Miller had built, clutching little gifts wrapped in old newspaper that still shone with joy. Emily Carter stood by the bookshelf, smiling as Sophie led the children in, reading aloud, page by page. Dorothy Wilson sat near the window, knitting a second scarf, her hands trembling but her eyes radiant. Linda Johnson carried in a tray of fresh cookies, her laughter echoing through the room. Frank Miller fiddled with the string of lights, then clapped softly as the tiny bulbs lit up all at once. Sophie looked up at Jonathan, her lips trembling before she spoke clearly. Dad. Jonathan froze, his eyes reddening. He pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking but firm. You are my daughter. From now and forever. Applause and cheers rang out. The other children clapped along, as though witnessing the birth of a new family right before their eyes. Jonathan stood near the framed photo of David Bennett on the wall, whispering to his late friend, David, I kept my word. I protected her, and I've turned this house into a place where light shines. Sophie placed a wooden star, carved by Frank, on the small memorial altar, whispering softly, Daddy, I read your letter. I did what you asked. I trusted Uncle Jonathan. Now he's my dad. In the days that followed, Harbor Light Center became a haven for many others. Homeless children found a place to study and drink warm milk. The elderly found companionship, knitting scarves and easing their loneliness. Volunteers, students, and teachers came in shifts to read stories to the children. The wooden sign outside glistened under the snow. Harbor Light Center, a place where every child has the right to hope. Jonathan sat on the porch, Sophie wrapped in her purple scarf, leaning against his shoulder. Watching the children run and laugh in the yard, he said quietly, A year ago, you were shivering in the cold rain. Today, you're leading other children forward. That's the strength of courage. Sophie smiled, tightening her grip on his hand. I'm not afraid anymore. And I know you're not afraid either. Night fell. Snowflakes shimmered beneath the streetlights. Amid Christmas carols filling the air and distant church bells ringing, Jonathan and Sophie stood in the embrace of their community, knowing the painful past had closed. But this story is not theirs alone. It is a reminder. When evil tries to drown us in darkness, kindness and justice will always light the way. Melissa and Brian have paid the price. Sophie found a family and a new home. Jonathan kept his promise to his fallen friend. The story closes, but the message remains. The wicked will face justice. The good will be rewarded. And though justice may come late, it never disappears. And you, where do you see yourself in this story? In Sophie's pain? Or in Jonathan's choice to stand up? Have you ever witnessed injustice and dared to speak out? If you met a Sophie right beside you, what would you do to chase away her fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that more people can hear stories that heal and reignite hope.